environmental policy, or any policy for that matter. It's the only way that reform comes. And I want to talk about the difference between public opinion and public protest. Public opinion, that's, 51% and you win the election. But that's not really what moves history. And I'll give you a quick little history of the environmental movement in this country, which I've had the privilege of studying and reporting on a lot. If you look back to the first Earth Day, there were 20 million Americans who went into the streets that day, 1970, April 22, 1970. Some of you are probably old enough to remember that. And very few, I'm sure, very few. 20 million people. That was about 10% of the American population in 1970. 20 million people went into their communities and they planted trees. And they got together and cleaned up creeks and streams. And they had teach-ins like this, where they taught kids science, and they educated voters about what government policy was, what certain lawmakers were and weren't doing. In short, those 20 million people went out and they demanded action from their government. We want clean air, we want clean water, but crucially, they also took action. They did not just demand action from their government, they took action themselves in their communities, and believe me, that is how you get politicians' attention. Not just by writing letters and all that, as important as that is, but when you go out and can show a politician that we are organized in your district and we are helping people to take action. We want you to take action, sir or ma'am, but meanwhile we are taking action. And the message that sends to a politician is very well illustrated by the man who was president at that time. And again, some of you people with gray hair will remember the name of the president in 1970. Anybody remember that famous name? A certain Mr. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, Republican, saw those 20 million people go into the street and was so impressed, frightened, worried, etc., that he decided that day that he had to take the environmental issue away from Democrats. He was going to run for re-election in 2 years, 1972, and he could see that there was a huge groundswell of not just public opinion, but public protest, public action, people getting into the streets. Now, Earth Day was much more polite getting into the streets than some of the anti-war and civil rights demonstrations. But bear in mind, Nixon was seeing this on Earth Day with that as a background. But in this case, it wasn't just those long-haired kids at Berkeley and Ann Arbor marching in the streets. It was librarians, it was pastors, it was little kids, it was middle America. Now, say what you want about Richard Nixon. The man was a very shrewd politician. And he saw those 20 million people, and he immediately decided, I've got to take this issue away from the Democrats. And because of that, today we now have, thanks to Richard Nixon, he championed the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the passage of the laws that are still the strongest environmental laws in the world, on paper at least. The clean, we have